The year 1816 is the most unusual in history. Summer simply never arrived in Western Europe and North America. That year became the coldest since weather records began. In Europe it was called the year without a summer, and in the US 1800 and froze to death. In March 1816, Europeans eagerly awaited the warmth, but the month turned out to be even colder than February. April and May also failed to bring spring. Cold rains and hail tormented Europe, while in the US, snow covered the streets. Summer arrived only on the calendar. Throughout June and July, frosts were observed in both Europe and the US. It snowed in New York, Berlin, Paris, London, and even Madrid. Why do I snow? In addition to the cold, numerous floods worsened the situation, leading to destruction and casualties. But the worst was yet to come. The third horseman of the apocalypse, Famine, was racing toward Europe. The abnormally cold summer simply did not allow people to harvest. Potatoes, rye, wheat, cabbage, everything perished. Wealthy families managed to hold on somehow, as they lived off the supplies they had previously stored. Because of the difficult situation, people had to slaughter their livestock, which only made things worse. At this time, a red sun hung over Europe. It had taken on a crimson-yellow hue. People, frightened by pastors' sermons about the apocalypse, spoke of the end of the world. This made the situation even worse and led to a rise in crime in European cities. What caused this climate catastrophe? How did it affect people's lives? What was happening in Russia at that time? You will find out in this video. The summer of 1816, known as the year without a summer, brought not only cold and hunger to Europe, but also an unusual creative event. A group of writers, including Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and John Polidori, were vacationing at a villa on Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The weather was so terrible that they spent all their time indoors to avoid boredom. Byron suggested that each of them write a scary story. Mary Shelley created the initial draft of her famous novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, the years 1816 to 1817. Byron wrote a fragment of a story with the main character named Angus Darvell, but quickly abandoned the idea. However, John Polidori remembered this story and in 1819 wrote the novella The Vampire. He published it in the New Monthly magazine under Byron's name, but Byron was very outraged and denied authorship. Polidori had to explain how things really happened. One way or another, the novella The Vampire became the first mention of vampires in the English language. And it was that wintry summer evening of scary stories that gave us Count Dracula and Edward Cullen from Twilight. Cholera outbreaks have always been present in India. But just as cholera would flare up, it would also die down, never spreading beyond India. However, a changing climate caused a mutation, and cholera began to spread to other regions, including Russia, triggering a global epidemic. Millions of people died. In 1830, soldiers returning from India brought cholera with them, and an epidemic broke out in the Russian Empire. Official data reports nearly 200 deaths and more than 500,000 cases. Cholera became a real disaster for Russia, causing panic and terror among the people. Legends began to emerge. Cholera was imagined as a black bird that flew at night. And if this bird touched the water, it would poison the reservoir. People tried to escape the disease by moving from one place to another. But this actually only spread the disease further, as people carried it with them to new regions. The authorities imposed a quarantine, and this was met with strong disapproval from the population. Cholera riots began to break out. Unfortunately, the doctors of that time did not know that the disease lived in water. And so all the precautions recommended by doctors and implemented by the authorities were simply ineffective. Climate change also affected China. There, all the rice crops were simply destroyed. As a result, famine, disease, and wars followed. At that time, China switched from growing rice to cultivating opium poppy, and this greatly displeased the British Empire and France. And so the Opium Wars broke out, lasting all the way until 1860 and claiming the lives of thousands of people. However, not all the consequences were so devastating. The chemist Johann von Liebig, who had experienced famine as a child, devoted his life to studying plant nutrition and synthesized the first mineral fertilizers. And the German professor Baron Karl von Drais invented the prototype of the bicycle. This became an important solution to the problem of transportation during the shortage of horses. Thus, although the cold summer caused horrifying consequences, it also became a catalyst for new inventions, discoveries, and literary masterpieces. So, what do you think if the writers hadn't been forced to stay indoors all day because of the terrible weather? If there hadn't been that gloomy, depressive atmosphere all around? With everyone thinking about the end of the world and something dreadful, would Frankenstein and the vampires have ever come into existence? And if the person who invented mineral fertilizers hadn't experienced such hardship in childhood like hunger, would he have become interested in plants and how to get the most benefit from them? Most likely, no. Friends, I know what question is bothering you the most right now. What was that? What happened that there was no summer for an entire year? The answer to this anomaly lies on the other side of the planet on Mount Tambora in Indonesia. On the 5th of April 1815, that is a year before all these events, the Tambora volcano began to show signs of activity. Over the next 4 months, the volcano erupted. It was the largest volcanic eruption ever witnessed by humans. At that time, many residents of the settlements near Mount Tambora perished. As a result of the eruption, so much ash and aerosols were released into the atmosphere that the sky darkened and the sun disappeared from view.
Today, by our current estimates, no fewer than 120,000 people tragically died there, a truly devastating loss of life.
Based on the approximate statistics of that time, it can be assumed that this was 90% of the island's population. It is very difficult to find testimonies from local residents, but Bernice managed to find a diary of an involuntary eyewitness who was on another island on Java.
John Crawford was a British officer serving in Surabaya at the time. He heard sounds that resembled artillery cannon fire.
Crawford assumed that a naval battle was taking place somewhere.
Surabaya was plunged into darkness for 3 days. On the third day, precisely at noon, there was an utterly impenetrable darkness. For 3 full days, I was absolutely forced to conduct my daily affairs by the flickering candlelight. The very next day, a thick, pervasive ash began to steadily fall from the sky.
John Crawford, without realizing it, became a witness to the largest volcanic eruption ever known, which occurred nearly 600 kilometers away.
Large particles ejected by the volcano fell to the ground nearby, covering cities with so much ash that houses collapsed. There are reports that in the region a layer of ash several meters thick was floating on the surface of the ocean. Ships had to make their way through it to reach the ports, but the finer particles ejected by the volcano were light enough to spread through the atmosphere in the following months. They affected the climate all over the world, breaking through into the stratosphere, where they easily spread across the globe. The average temperature on Earth dropped by 3 degrees Celsius. That is a huge amount.
Gradually descending, the aerosols finally reached altitudes where they began to be washed out by rain. This unprecedented event led to a year where, for the first time, spring did not come in 1816, causing widespread disruption. The cold spell lasted for several years, but 1816 was the harshest.
This story shocked me so much that I just had to share it with you. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and see you in the next video.